As you read the Torah portion of Re'eh in the book of Deuteronomy, it almost feels like Moses is changing the subject every few paragraphs. First, he warns the people against idolatry. Then he speaks about false prophets and dreamers who might lead the people astray. Without much transition, the Torah moves into the laws of kashrut, listing the animals that may and may not be eaten. A little later, it discusses tithing, the obligation to support the Levites and those in need. Then it introduces the sabbatical year and the cancellation of debts. These are not random topics at all. Moses is not changing the subject. He is answering one fundamental question: what shapes a Jewish life? Or what shapes a holy life? What kind of habits, values, and commitments produce a person who walks in God's way? The choices that define our lives begin with the way we perceive reality. Therefore, the first question that this portion asks is, what do you worship? Most of us have never bowed before a statue of Baal or Asherah, so it is tempting to think that idolatry belongs to the ancient world. The prophets, however, understood idolatry as something much deeper than carved images. An idol is anything that occupies the place in our hearts that belong only to God. Money can become an idol. Success can become an idol. Political identity can become an idol. So can technology, reputation, or even our own desires. An idol is not necessarily something evil. Very often, it is something good that has been given ultimate importance. The Torah portion begins here because whatever we worship will eventually shape every other decision we make. Immediately afterward comes the warning against false prophets and dreamers. Once we decide what we worship, the next question naturally follows: who do we trust? The Torah describes charismatic figures capable of attracting followers and speaking with confidence. They may even perform signs that seem convincing. Yet Moses insists that charisma is never enough. Israel must measure every voice against the covenant. That lesson has lost none of its urgency. Today, everyone can have a platform. Every day we're invited to believe someone who claims to have discovered the hidden truth that everyone else has missed. Political movements promise salvation. Social media personalities become moral authorities. Algorithms quietly decide what we read, what outrages us, and what we begin to believe about the world. Judaism has always encouraged questioning. It has also taught us to be careful about whom we allow to shape our minds. Not every loud voice deserves our trust. Then the Torah turns to kashrut. The question now is, what do we consume? Kashrut reminds us that even eating can become a spiritual act. Food is not simply for fuel or pleasure. Judaism asks us to bring consciousness to something we do several times a day. We pause before we eat. We make distinctions. We acknowledge that even our physical appetites can be guided by holiness. And that principle reaches far beyond food. Every day we consume ideas, news, entertainment, advertisement, and endless streams of information. We spend hours feeding our minds, often without asking whether what we're consuming is nourishing or simply filling us. Kashrut teaches that discipline is not only about enters our mouths, it is also what enters our hearts and our minds. The Parashat continues with the laws of tithing. And here another question emerges. What do I do with what I own? Modern society often teaches us to think of wealth as entirely private. If I earn it, it belongs to me. and what I do with it is nobody else's concern. The Torah offers a different perspective. The land belongs to God. Our abilities are gifts. Our opportunities are blessings. Giving tzedakah is therefore not only an act of generosity, it is an acknowledgement that what we possess carries with it responsibilities. The purpose of the tithe is not simply to help someone else. It also protects us from becoming possessed by our possessions. When we learn to give regularly, we remind ourselves that we are stewards rather than absolute owners. Finally, the Torah speaks about the remission of debts during the sabbatical year. Here, the question is, how do I treat the society in which I live, especially those who are struggling? In the ancient world, debt could become a life sentence. Families could spend generations trying to recover from a single financial collapse. Every 7 years, the Torah interrupts that cycle. It declares that economic life cannot be governed solely by profit and loss. Human dignity matters more. The Torah knows human nature well. It anticipates that someone will say, well, the sabbatical year is almost here. If I lend money now, I may never get it back. The Torah responds by saying, do not let that calculation harden your heart. Compassion cannot depend entirely on what is economically advantageous. When we step back and we look at the Torah portion as a whole, we discover that every one of these commandments is asking the same question from a different angle. What do you worship? Whom do you trust? What do you consume? What do you do with what you have been given? And how do you respond to the needs of those around you? That is what shapes a holy life. Judaism is defined not only by prayer or by belief or ritual observance. A Jewish life is formed in the ordinary decisions we make every day, the voices we follow, the habits we develop, the way we spend our resources, and the compassion we extend to others. Perhaps that is why the Parashat begins with a single word, re'eh, see. Learn to see clearly. See the difference between what deserves your devotion and what merely demands your attention. See the difference between wisdom and noise. If we learn to see the world through the eyes of the Torah, then blessing is no longer an abstract promise waiting somewhere in the future. It becomes something we create, choice by choice, every day, as we shape our lives and the kind of society we hope to build.